And so the fun begins. At this point, you're about to learn about one of the most critical pieces of foundational knowledge that you can learn about programming: conditional logic. And we're going to look at a statement called an if statement. Before we jump into that, write out a little bit of code from our previous lessons. Let's ask for a name from the user, and we'll create a variable called my name. Actually, let's call it user name, and let's get that with input. And we are going to prompt the user and say, enter your name. And I don't want that to be capitalized. Okay, so we know that that's just going to ask the user for their name, and it's going to store the value that they give us in username. Now, let's use some of that relational, some of the relational operators that we learned about, and let's create an if statement. So all you have to do is write out, you guessed it, if. Now, if we write out if, what follows after that should be either a Boolean variable or a expression that has relational operators in it. We call that a condition. So it's really just an expression, but we call it a condition because it's more specific. So the if statement has a condition, and if it is true, then it will do something. Let's write out the condition, and then we'll talk about how it does something. So let's say if username, and we're going to say equals equals, so we're testing for equality, right? And we're going to say if it equals JSON, then we want to do something, right? And we know that this condition or expression is going to evaluate to a single Boolean value, right? If the user gives us the username JSON with a capital J, like I typed it, then it will be true. And if it's false, or if they don't equal, then it will be false. So the way that we tell the if statement, here's what you do if this statement is true, if this condition is true, you add a colon, press enter, and our editor actually already indented for us. So you'll notice that we didn't go back to the start of the line like we have been when you press enter. You automatically start one tab over, or it could be 4 spaces, but either way, you start indented on the next line. And we call that a block of code. So this allows us to specify code that will only run if the username equal JSON is evaluated to true. So any code that we write here only evaluates if that's true, right? So we could say print hi JSON, you have been granted access. Okay, so notice as long as I keep pressing enter, it keeps me inside of this block. In this block, I could have other if statements. I can keep writing all the other code I want. And as long as I stay indented like this, that's how Python knows that this block of code is tied to this if statement, this conditional logic here, right? So this is how you add some control and change your program so that it only does certain things based on the values that you check. So you add some flow control, right? So let's try testing this out and just see what we get. Oh, ha! Look at that. Okay, I got an error, and I didn't realize I did this, but it says name error. Name input is not defined. What is my error? Right here. It's telling me that, hey, on line 2, so line 2 of my code, I don't know what you're talking about, but there's nothing called input with a capital I. So, gotta fix that. So now if we run it, it asks us to enter our name. So I'm gonna write in Jason and press enter. And it says, hi, Jason, you've been granted access. Now let's run it again. And this time, let's say my name is Fred. It doesn't do anything. So because my name was Fred, username was set to Fred. You know, I'll start here actually. So we get input. We say our name is Fred, but we said it was with a capital F. But in any case, username equals Fred. So when it checks on line 4, it will go get the value of username, which will be set to Fred. And Fred does not equal Jason. Don't call me Fred. So that will be false. And the if statement block of code will only execute if true. So you could think of when you see if, it's saying if true. Now, let me fix that up here so we're got our code back. Now, what if I want to test for multiple things? What if I want to say if the username is equal to Jason and something else? So I can say, let's just add another thing up here and we'll say user age equals, and I'm just going to type it in because you get the idea with input. We'll say user age equals 30. And then down here, we'll say if the username is equal to Jason, and we literally just type out and now we can test for 2 different expressions. So we can use relational operators again to come up with another Boolean value. We can test another, we can ask another question is what we can do. So we can say, we want to say the username is Jason and this other thing has to be true as well, or don't run this block of code. So we could say the user age is, we'll say greater than 15. Okay? So we know that that will be true, right? Because it's going to go get the value of user age and it will be 30, and 30 is greater than 15. So this will end up becoming true. So if we run this just to show you, and I type in Jason, it says, hi, you've been granted access. So what if I change my age to 14? And we run it again. I give my name. Nothing. Because both of the conditions have to be true. Because we used and. So and both things have to be true. You're able to test and make sure 2 Boolean values are true. And you know, these relational operators are evaluating to a Boolean value. So, you know, this becomes true, and because my user age is 14, user age is less than 15, so this becomes false. So it's if true and false. That doesn't work because we know that the condition for an if statement must be true. And what happens here is true and false is false. And so the if statement doesn't execute. So let's get our code back. Let's talk about, so we have and. we also have or. So, or either of these conditions could be true. So if this is true or this is true, then run this block of code. So for example, user age is 14, which is less than 15. So this would be false. But as long as I provide the username Jason, it will run that block of code. Okay, so that's the or. We've talked about and or. Let's talk about one more. So remember, not. Well, they also have the word not. So you can say if not username equal Jason, then it will basically take whatever this Boolean value is and flip it. So if username equal Jason is true, it will become false. And it kind of makes sense when you read it out. So let's execute this code to see what happens, and then I'll talk about it. So if I say my name's Jason, it does nothing. Now, if I run it and provide literally anything else, it'll run this block of code. And that's because if I provide any other name, well, let's say I provided Jason. You know, it's going to go get the value. Jason equals Jason is true, right? Well, that reads and kind of makes sense. If not true, then do this stuff. That's where we start getting those like double negatives. Like, I don't know if you necessarily call that a double negative, but it's something that kind of takes a little bit to wrap your head around. So kind of play around with it. And it might be another one of those things you need to just commit to memory, because I know like when you first are learning about this conditional logic stuff and combining ands and ors and nots, it gets a little weird. But the easiest way to remember it is this runs because the condition needs to be true, right? Whatever that if statement's condition is, it has to be true or the block of code doesn't run. So not, just change it, it flips the value. Don't even like think about, if you read it and it makes no sense to you, then change how you read it. Don't really try to read it like English, and just know that not takes this and changes the value. So not true. What is not true? False, right? Like not true is just false. And look, I didn't put the capital F, so I didn't know what I was talking about. You know, and so if something is not false, then it must be true. Now, maybe when there's a little bit more nuance in the world, there's some gray area, but in computer science and Boolean values, we only have two possible values, true or false. So if something is not false, the only other thing it can be is true, right? So not false evaluates to true. So this program will run. So that's why, if I get back to where all the code was, when I provide a random username, like BASLDEKFN, that name does not equal my name. So that is false. And then not false, the only other thing it can be is true. So it runs. Okay, so that is if statements. And we talked about blocks of code. You can have blocks within blocks. The only other thing that's worth mentioning, you can string these together. Now, I don't want to use not because that gets kind of confusing when you have not like that. But so you have and, let's say and user age is greater than 15, like we said. You can add more. You can say and just keep going. And you can have or as well. But if you add in and you have an or at the end, you're gonna have like it's gonna be hard to understand. So just like when we were talking about PEMDAS and how you have parentheses and you can wrap things in parentheses, you can wrap those expressions in parentheses, right, and control how they evaluate, the order that they evaluate in. You should definitely do that with when you have multiple relational operators in play, and when you have multiple conditional logic in play, like these ands and ors. So if you wanted to test like username Jason and user age greater than 15, and you want to have some more in there, but maybe you want to test a whole nother thing, you want to have an or, and then you could test or true. So this will always be true, no matter what. Doesn't even matter what I provide. It literally, this could be false every time, but because of the parentheses, this is going to evaluate down eventually to a single Boolean value, true or false. If it evaluates to false, well then we just have false or true, and we already know that an or statement, only one has to be true. So play around with that. I mean, really play around with it, get comfortable with it. And this is where a lot of the power of programming comes from. Okay, so hopefully you're a little bit more familiar with how these the conditional logic works with the ands and the ors, and how the relational operators work, and how these conditions evaluate down to a single Boolean value. Now, what about when you want to handle when the if statement condition is false? So let's say if username equals Jason, then we want to do this block of code, right? Now, what if we want to also do something when that condition is false? Instead of just doing nothing like we've seen, we write out elif. This stands for else if. So if the username equals Jason, do this. Else if, or another way you could say it would be like otherwise do this. And you can actually have multiple, so otherwise might not be a great word. Like maybe, so if username equals Jason, do this. I don't know, I'm so used to saying else. Yeah, I would just say else. I can't think of a better word. So like else if do something else. So we could say else if username is equal to Fred. Let's handle a situation for Fred. So if the username equals Fred, then let's say, notice how it takes you in and you're already in a new block of code. It indents you over. Python does that for everything, right? We say print get out of here, Fred. Okay, and let's try running that and see what happens. If we type in Fred, it says get out of here, Fred. And if we run it again and we say our name is Jason, it says hi, Jason. So in this way, we're able to add in logic that changes what the program does based on the value that the user provided. We use these relational operators as conditions, and we are able to use the if statement to create different blocks of code that run based on that value. All right, so that's if statements and else if statements. What about if none of these are true? Then we have else. So if do this, if some condition, then do this block of code. Else if this condition, do this block of code. And then else, or now this would be like otherwise, really. Like otherwise you couldn't really find the right answer. None of these conditions are true. Then do this. So it's kind of like a catch-all. You could say, maybe we print out, I don't know. Oh, haha, look at that. So we can't have the, I was going to put a apostrophe here for don't, but look, it's broken out of my string. So another operator that we can use that we really haven't talked about yet, except for when we're talking about new line, is the escape operator. It's just a backslash. So if I use the backslash, it basically tells Python, hey, don't use that operator the way you normally do. So the backslash in this case is saying, don't use the apostrophe like you normally do, the single quote, to represent the end or beginning of a string. In this case, I just want it to be a single quote. So we use the escape character, the backslash, and now I'm able to have a single quote inside of my string. And we can say, I don't know who you are. And just for the sake of showing you, since we're talking about the escape character, backslash in was that new line, like when you press enter on the keyboard. So if I do 3 backslash ins, it'll be 3 new lines. So let's see what that looks like. If I run and I say my name is Joe, it actually, or too zoomed in so you can't see that the 3 new lines move the cursor down too far, but it says, I don't know who you are. And then it printed 3 new lines. So kind of cool. Backslash in is for the new line, and use backslash to escape if you wanted to have a single quote. And just to show you again what happens if you don't have that, it's confused because it thinks this is my string, and now I'm just typing code out again, and it's like, that's not anything I know about. So I use the escape operator. Okay, so if statement with a condition followed by a block of code for that if statement, the elif statement or else if statement that only executes if this statement is false. So you might have noticed that, right? Like if I type out, my name's Fred, well, it's not Jason, right? So Fred does not equal Jason. So this is false. This block of code is skipped. Now this one is checked, and my name is Fred, so it prints out, get out of here, Fred. Or if my name was Joe, it doesn't do any of those things, and it prints out, I don't know who you are. Now, the same thing goes if my name is Jason, it only prints out, hi, Jason, you've been granted access. That's because they are branched together. So once one of these conditions is satisfied, it breaks out and it doesn't do any more of these if-else conditions. It doesn't check any of the other ones. It's just done, and it breaks out and comes back down after the else or the last elif that's on this scope here. And so the scope is just what block you're in. So if you're in the main block, right? This is a block. Then once it executes this is true, and it executes this block of code, it's going to break out and go back one indent to wherever that block of code was, and it's going to see this else and say, well, that was part of that if else branch, so I'm going to skip down here. And what's down here on line 12? So like if I put print goodbye, that will run no matter what, because it's not tied to one of these if, elif, or else statements, it's not indented into one of those blocks. So no matter what, if we say my name is Jason, it'll always say goodbye, right? If I say my name's Fred, it always runs. All right, so that's if statements and elif statements and else statements. Great little dive into conditional logic for probably one of the most used conditional statements, but there's a few other ones that we want to take a look at, and we'll do that now.